The scream came from behind the locked bathroom door, and Daniel didn't recognize his own fiancée's voice in it. Inside was Amara, the maid who had raised his late mother's roses without ever asking for a raise, sobbing on the tile floor with a torn envelope in her hands. On the marble counter sat a diamond bracelet that Amara had never once touched, and a housekeeping badge that wasn't even hers. Vanessa stood in the doorway, pointing, her voice trembling with something that almost looked like grief, almost looked real. By the end of that week, one of these two women would lose everything she had, and Daniel had no idea yet which one deserved to. Welcome back, everyone, to another story about the secrets people hide behind closed doors, and the quiet strength it takes to survive them. If you love stories about loyalty, betrayal, and the truth finally catching up to the people who thought they'd buried it, you're exactly where you need to be. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments, and if stories like this move you, stay close, because this one's going to surprise you. Daniel Hartwell had built his fortune the hard way, even if nobody believed that anymore. People saw the penthouse in Manhattan, the estate in Connecticut, the private jet that carried his name in small silver letters near the tail, and they assumed he'd been handed all of it. They didn't know about the 9 years he spent sleeping 4 hours a night, building a logistics company out of a garage in Newark before it became something that made magazine covers want him. He was 36 now, broad-shouldered, quiet in the way that confident men are quiet, and for the first time in a long time, he thought he'd found someone who wanted him and not his name. Her name was Vanessa Cole. She'd walked into his life at a charity gala 18 months ago wearing a green dress that made every other woman in the room look like she was trying too hard, and she'd laughed at a joke he made about the auctioneer that nobody else caught. Daniel liked that. He liked that she noticed things. What he didn't yet understand was that Vanessa noticed things because she was always calculating them. Vanessa came from money that had quietly evaporated 3 years before she met him. Her father's construction firm had collapsed under debt nobody outside the family knew about, and she'd learned to smile through galas while her mother sold off jewelry piece by piece to keep the lights on. She never told Daniel this. She let him believe she came from old money the same way he came from new money. Two wealthy people finding each other in a crowded room. The truth was simpler and colder. She needed him, and she had built her entire personality around making sure he never found out how much. The engagement had happened 6 months ago, on the terrace of his Connecticut estate, with a kind of ring that made her mother cry actual tears of relief. Since then, Vanessa had been slowly, carefully making herself the center of Daniel's household, rearranging his kitchen, replacing his housekeeper of 11 years with someone she called more efficient, redecorating rooms he hadn't asked her to touch. Daniel let it happen because he told himself it was normal, that women like to make a house their own before a wedding. He didn't notice that with every change, Vanessa was also quietly removing anyone who had known him before her. Everyone except Amara Bennett. Amara had worked for the Hartwell family since she was 23, hired originally by Daniel's mother, Eleanor, back when the estate still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Eleanor had passed away 4 years ago from a slow illness that took her in pieces, and in her final year, it had been Amara who sat with her most nights, who learned which songs calmed her when the pain got bad, who kept the rose garden alive because Eleanor loved it more than any room in the house. Daniel had never forgotten that. Amara wasn't just staff to him. She was one of the last living pieces of his mother. She was 27 now, careful and steady in the way people become when they've had to be the responsible one their whole life. Her daughter, Zoe, was 3, a small serious girl who watched the world with wide brown eyes and rarely spoke unless she had something worth saying. Amara raised her alone in a modest apartment 40 minutes from the estate, working long hours, saving every extra dollar toward a nursing degree she took online, one class at a time, because she wanted more for Zoe than a life spent cleaning other people's homes. She never complained about the commute or the hours. She showed up early, stayed late when Daniel needed her to, and treated the house like it still belonged to the woman who'd hired her. Vanessa hated her from the first week. It wasn't loud hatred. Vanessa was too smart for that. It was small things, A comment about Amara's old-fashioned way of folding towels, a suggestion to Daniel that maybe the household needed fresh energy, a habit of speaking to Amara in front of guests in a tone just slightly too sweet, the kind of sweetness that made people in the room feel awkward without knowing why. Amara noticed. She always noticed. But she needed the job, needed the health insurance for Zoe, needed the steady income that let her keep paying for classes, so she swallowed it and kept working. What Vanessa didn't know was that Daniel had noticed too, in the vague way people notice something is slightly off without being able to name it. He'd catch a strange look pass over Amara's face after Vanessa left a room, and he'd think nothing of it, because he had no reason yet to think anything at all. Vanessa had been careful. Vanessa was always careful. The trouble started on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding was supposed to happen. Vanessa's cousin was hosting a small dinner party at the estate, the kind of event where jewelry got worn and photographed and later discussed at other dinner parties. Vanessa wore her mother's diamond bracelet that night, one of the last pieces her family hadn't sold, an heirloom that mattered to her more than almost anything else she owned. She made a show of it at dinner, holding her wrist up to the candlelight for her cousin to admire, and Amara, who was serving that evening, watched from a respectful distance and thought nothing of it either. The bracelet went missing sometime after midnight. Vanessa discovered it the next morning, standing in her closet in a silk robe. Her voice rising to a pitch Daniel had never heard from her before. She tore through drawers, checked every pocket of every dress she'd worn, and then, in front of Daniel, she said the sentence that would set everything in motion. Amara was the last one in this room. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a small cold weight he didn't want to examine too closely. He told himself there had to be an explanation. Amara had worked for his family for 4 years without a single complaint against her. But Vanessa's eyes were wet and desperate, and she kept saying the same thing over and over, that nobody else had been upstairs, that Amara had come in to turn down the bed, that the bracelet had been on the dresser when she left for dinner and gone when she came back. Daniel didn't confront Amara that day. He told himself he needed to think. But that night, lying awake beside Vanessa, he found himself replaying every strange look, every quiet moment between the two women he'd never quite understood, and for the first time, doubt crept in where trust used to live without question. He didn't know yet that Vanessa had planted the bracelet herself, wrapped in a hand towel at the bottom of Amara's supply cart, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. He didn't know that this was only the beginning. The accusation didn't come all at once. Vanessa was too clever for that. Instead, over the following days, she planted small suggestions the way a gardener plants seeds she knows will grow into something else entirely. "I'm not saying she took it," Vanessa told Daniel over breakfast, stirring her coffee without looking at him. "I just think it's strange that nobody else was in that room." "Maybe you misplaced it," Daniel said, though even as he said it, he felt less certain than he sounded. "I know my own jewelry, Daniel." Her voice cracked slightly, just enough. "That bracelet is the last thing I have of my grandmother's. Do you think I'd imagine losing it?" He didn't have an answer for that. He watched his fiancée's eyes fill with tears. She blinked back with visible effort, and something in him wanted to comfort her more than he wanted to defend a housekeeper who had never given him a reason to doubt her, until now. Amara felt the shift immediately. She'd worked in enough houses to recognize the particular chill of being suspected of something. Daniel still greeted her politely, still thanked her for coffee in the mornings, but there was a new distance in his eyes, a hesitation that hadn't existed a week ago. She wanted to defend herself, to simply say she hadn't touched the bracelet, but something told her that denying an accusation nobody had officially made to her face would only make her look guiltier. So she kept working, kept her head down, and prayed the whole situation would resolve itself. Didn't. 3 days later, Vanessa found a second item missing, a pair of pearl earrings she claimed had been in her jewelry box since the engagement party. This time she brought it to Daniel with far less hesitation, far more certainty in her voice. "I think we need to talk to her," Vanessa said. "Formally. I don't feel safe in my own room anymore." Daniel felt sick about it, but he agreed to a conversation. He called Amara into his study that evening, and for the first time in 4 years, he found himself unable to look her fully in the eye. "Amara," he started carefully, "some items have gone missing from Vanessa's room. I have to ask you directly. Do you know anything about it?" Amara stood very still. She thought of Zoe waiting at her sister's apartment, of the nursing textbooks stacked on her kitchen table, of every early morning she'd shown up to make sure this house ran the way Eleanor Hartwell would have wanted it to run. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I would never take anything from this house. I promise you that." Daniel wanted to believe her. Something in the steadiness of her voice, the way she met his eyes without flinching, made him want to trust her completely. But then he thought of Vanessa's tears that morning, the tremble in her hands, and he found himself caught between two women telling him two different truths, unable yet to see which one was real. "I believe you," he said finally, though even he wasn't sure if that was fully true. "But I need to ask you not to go into our bedroom alone for a while. Just until this is sorted out." The words landed on Amara like a small, quiet blow. It wasn't an accusation exactly, but it wasn't innocence either. It was the kind of limbo that stripped away dignity without ever officially taking anything from her. That night, Amara went home and sat at her kitchen table long after Zoe had fallen asleep, staring at the stack of unpaid nursing school invoices, wondering how she was supposed to defend herself against something that had never happened, wondering if this was how it would end. Not with proof, but with enough doubt to make her disposable. She didn't know that 4 floors above, in the empty guest bedroom Vanessa rarely used, there was a small nanny camera tucked into a bookshelf. One Daniel's late mother had installed years ago after a break-in scare. One Vanessa didn't know still existed and quietly recorded to a cloud server nobody had checked in years. She also didn't know that the earrings Vanessa claimed were missing were, at that very moment, sitting in a velvet box inside Vanessa's own overnight bag, exactly where Vanessa had put them the morning she decided a second accusation would make the first one more believable. What Amara did know was that something had changed in the house, some current running beneath the surface that she couldn't name but could feel every time Vanessa walked past her with that same too sweet smile. She started keeping a small notebook in her apron pocket, writing down times and dates. Small details she couldn't yet explain but felt, somehow might matter later. She had no idea yet how right she was. 2 nights after the confrontation in the study, Amara was gathering dirty linens from the hallway outside the guest bedroom when she heard voices through the cracked door. Vanessa on the phone, laughing in a way Amara had never heard her laugh in front of Daniel. "It's working," Vanessa was saying, her voice low and pleased. "He's already starting to doubt her. Give it another week." Amara froze in the hallway, her heart hammering, the linens forgotten in her arms. She didn't hear who was on the other end of the call. She didn't hear anything else before Vanessa's footsteps moved toward the door, and Amara had to hurry away, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had no proof, no recording, just 3 sentences overheard through a door, and a growing certainty that something far more calculated than jealousy was happening in this house. That night, she wrote it all down in her notebook, word for word, as close as she could remember. Then she closed the notebook, held it against her chest, and allowed herself, for the first time in days, to cry. The days that followed felt to Amara like walking across thin ice, never certain which step would be the one that broke through. Vanessa's small comments grew sharper, laced with implications she never quite finished. At dinner one evening, in front of 2 guests, Vanessa mentioned, "How unfortunate it is when you can't fully trust the people in your own home," and smiled at Amara across the room as she said it. Daniel didn't correct her, though Amara noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes flicked toward her and then away. Zoe noticed something too, in the way small children notice the moods adults think they're hiding. One evening, when Amara picked her up from her sister's apartment, Zoe studied her mother's face for a long moment before asking, in her small serious voice, "Mommy, why do you look sad at the big house?" Amara knelt down and pulled her daughter close, unable to find an answer that wouldn't frighten her. "Mommy's just tired, baby," she said, and hated herself a little for the lie. The turning point came on a Thursday, 10 days before the wedding was scheduled to happen. Daniel had been in his study reviewing catering contracts when he noticed something strange in his email. A delivery confirmation for a jewelry cleaning service he didn't remember scheduling, dated 3 days after Vanessa first claimed her earrings had gone missing. Curious, he opened the confirmation and found a photo attachment. Vanessa's pearl earrings, sitting in a velvet cleaning pouch, time-stamped and logged by a jeweler on Fifth Avenue. He stared at the photo for a long time. If the earrings had been stolen, how were they at a jeweler 3 days later? He didn't say anything to Vanessa yet. Instead, he did something he rarely did. He called his mother's old estate manager, a retired man named Walter who had overseen the house for 2 decades before Daniel took over the family properties. Walter remembered something Daniel had forgotten entirely: a small security camera, installed in the guest bedroom bookshelf after a scare years ago, connected to an old cloud account that had likely been running untouched ever since. "Your mother never wanted to feel unsafe in her own home," Walter told him over the phone. "I doubt anyone ever took that camera down. Eleanor liked to know things, Daniel. She always did." Daniel spent that night alone in his study, laptop open, scrolling through weeks of grainy motion-triggered footage from a camera nobody else in the house knew still existed. Most of it was nothing. Vanessa checking her reflection, folding clothes, talking on the phone about wedding seating arrangements. But then he found the footage from the night the bracelet disappeared. He watched Vanessa enter the guest room alone, remove something small and glittering from her own handbag, and tuck it carefully into a hand towel before slipping out toward the servants' hallway where the housekeeping carts were stored. Daniel's hands went cold on the keyboard. He kept watching. He found the footage from the morning of the missing earrings, Vanessa placing them into her own overnight bag, checking to make sure they were hidden beneath a folded scarf, then closing the bag with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction on her face. And then he found the phone call. The same one Amara had overheard through the door, except this time, the camera had caught Vanessa's side of the conversation clearly. "It's working. He's already starting to doubt her. Give it another week, and I'll have full control of this house before we're even married." Daniel sat back in his chair, his chest tight, his mind refusing at first to fully process what he was seeing. 18 months of trust, 6 months of engagement, and it had all been built on a foundation designed by someone who had been lying to him with practiced ease since the night they met. He thought of Amara's steady voice in his study, the way she'd looked him in the eye and said she would never take anything from this house. He thought of how easily he'd let doubt creep in anyway, how close he'd come to letting an innocent woman lose her job, her reputation, maybe even her chance at the future she was quietly building for her daughter. Shame settled over him, heavy and uncomfortable. But shame alone wasn't enough. He needed to understand why. What was Vanessa actually after, beyond simple cruelty? He spent the rest of the night digging through emails he'd never had reason to check before, financial records Vanessa had access to as his fiancée, and what he found made the earlier footage feel almost secondary. Vanessa had been quietly requesting information from his estate attorney about prenuptial agreement terms, about what percentage of his assets would transfer to her in the event of his death, about how quickly those terms could be finalized before the wedding date. She'd also, 3 weeks earlier, inquired about increasing her authority over household staffing decisions. Specifically, the authority to terminate any employee without Daniel's direct approval. She hadn't just wanted Amara gone because of jealousy or cruelty for its own sake. She'd wanted her gone because Amara was one of the last people in the house who remembered the family before Vanessa arrived. One of the last people who might notice if something in Daniel's life started changing in ways that benefited only her. Daniel closed his laptop near 4 in the morning, sat in the dark of his study, and understood, with a kind of quiet devastation, exactly how close he'd come to marrying someone who had been dismantling his life piece by careful piece, using kindness as a mask and cruelty as a tool. The question now wasn't whether Vanessa was guilty. It was what he was going to do about it, and how he was going to make things right with the woman he'd nearly let take the fall for it. Daniel didn't confront Vanessa the next morning. He'd learned enough about her in one night to understand that confronting her without a plan would only give her time to construct a new lie, a new performance of tears and confusion designed to make him doubt what he'd seen with his own eyes. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He called his attorney, then his old estate manager, and finally, carefully, he found a moment alone with Amara in the garden where his mother's roses still grew. She was kneeling by the flower beds when he approached, her hands in the soil, Zoe's small drawing of a rose tucked carefully into her apron pocket where it always stayed during work hours. She looked up at him warily, and Daniel felt the full weight of what his silence over the past 2 weeks had cost her. "Amara," he said, his voice rough, "I need to apologize to you. And I need you to know that I believe you. I've believed you for hours now, and I should have believed you from the very beginning." Amara sat back on her heels, studying his face for any sign that this was another twist in a situation that had already cost her sleep, dignity, and more than a few nights of quiet crying after Zoe had gone to bed. "What did you find?" she asked carefully. He told her everything: the camera, the footage, the phone call, the financial inquiries. He watched her face shift through disbelief, then something like validation, then finally a tired kind of relief that made his chest ache with guilt. "I heard part of that call," Amara admitted quietly. "The night she was on the phone in the guest room. I didn't have proof. I didn't know what to do with what I'd heard, so I wrote it down. I thought maybe someday it would matter." She reached into her apron pocket, past Zoe's drawing, and pulled out a small worn notebook. She handed it to him without another word. Daniel opened it and found pages of careful dated notes. Times, phrases, small observations that on their own meant little, but together painted a picture that matched exactly what the camera had shown him. "You could have told me this weeks ago," Daniel said, though he already understood the answer before she gave it. "Who was going to believe the maid over your fiancé?" Amara asked, not unkindly, just honest. "I needed this job, Mr. Hartwell. Have a daughter. I couldn't afford to be wrong, and I couldn't afford to be right either, if being right meant losing everything trying to prove it." The honesty of it landed harder than any accusation could have. Daniel realized, standing in his mother's rose garden, that Amara had been carrying the full weight of this situation completely alone, protecting herself with nothing but careful silence and a notebook, while he'd had the luxury of simply feeling confused. "That's going to change," he said. "Starting now." He asked her to keep the notebook as her own copy and told her he intended to handle Vanessa directly, formally, with his attorney present, before the end of the week. He asked Amara not to say anything to anyone in the household yet, not because he doubted her, but because he needed the confrontation to happen on his terms, with all the evidence intact, so that Vanessa would have no room left to twist the story into something else. Amara agreed, though the tension in her shoulders didn't fully leave until days later. Vanessa, meanwhile, sensed nothing had changed. She continued her small cruelties, unaware that every one of them was now being noted not just in a housekeeper's private notebook, but in Daniel's own growing certainty about who she truly was. 2 days before the confrontation, she made her boldest move yet. She told Daniel over dinner that she'd decided Amara needed to be let go entirely, for everyone's peace of mind, and suggested they finalize it before the wedding so there would be no lingering tension in the household. Daniel looked at her across the candlelit table, this woman he'd planned to marry, and felt something cold settle where warmth used to be. "I'll think about it," he said, and watched her smile, satisfied, completely unaware that she had just handed him the final piece of confirmation he needed. That night, Daniel called a small, private meeting for 2 days later. His attorney, Walter, and quietly Amara, though Vanessa wouldn't know about the last name on that list until she walked into the room herself. The morning of the confrontation, Amara stood in her small kitchen, tying her apron with hands that trembled slightly, and looked at Zoe eating breakfast at the table. "Mommy has something important to do today," she told her daughter. "But I promise whatever happens, we're going to be okay." Zoe studied her for a long moment, the way she always did, and then said something that stayed with Amara for the rest of the day. "The bad lady is going to be sad," Zoe said simply, matter-of-fact, the way only a 3-year-old could be. "But you're not bad, Mommy. You're good." Amara didn't ask how her daughter had sensed any of it. She simply kissed her forehead, dropped her at her sister's, and drove to the estate with a notebook tucked safely in her bag, ready for whatever the day would bring. She had no idea that by evening everything would finally, completely change. The meeting took place in Daniel's study at 11 in the morning, sunlight cutting clean lines across the hardwood floor. Vanessa arrived expecting a conversation about wedding logistics, dressed elegantly, her smile already prepared for whatever audience awaited her. She stopped in the doorway when she saw who else was in the room: Daniel's attorney seated near the desk, Walter standing quietly by the window, and Amara in her uniform, sitting in a chair Vanessa had never once seen a member of the staff invited to occupy. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, her voice already sharpening into practiced offense. "Sit down, Vanessa," Daniel said, and something in his tone made her hesitate before she obeyed. He didn't waste time with preamble. He opened his laptop, turned the screen toward her, and played the footage. The bracelet hidden in the towel, the earrings tucked beneath the scarf, the phone call where her own voice, clear and unmistakable, described exactly how she planned to have full control of this house before the wedding even happened. Vanessa's face went through several transformations in rapid succession. Shock, then denial, then something colder and more calculating as she realized denial wouldn't work. "You don't understand," she started, her voice trembling in a way that, for the first time, didn't move Daniel at all. "I was under so much pressure, Daniel, my family, the wedding I never meant. You planted stolen jewelry in an innocent woman's cart," Daniel said, his voice quiet but absolutely steady. "You accused her publicly of theft. You tried to have her fired. You were investigating my prenuptial terms and inheritance structure before we were even married. Tell me which part of that was pressure, Vanessa, and which part was a plan." She had no answer that wouldn't incriminate her further, and for the first time since Daniel had known her, Vanessa Cole sat in complete silence. He turned to Amara. "I owe you an apology in front of everyone in this room," he said. "I doubted you when I shouldn't have. I let someone I trusted make me question the character of someone who had never given me a single reason to doubt her. Not once in 4 years. That's on me, and I'm sorry." Amara nodded, her throat tight, but she held herself with the same quiet dignity she'd carried through every difficult moment of the past 2 weeks. "Thank you for finally seeing it," she said simply. "That's all I ever needed. Not revenge. Just the truth." Daniel's attorney handled the rest with clinical efficiency. The engagement was formally ended that afternoon. Vanessa was given a narrow window to remove her belongings from the estate, under supervision, and informed that any attempt to publicly misrepresent what had happened would be met with the full weight of the evidence Daniel now possessed. She left the house 2 hours later, her carefully constructed image finally cracking in front of the household staff she'd spent months trying to control. Her engagement ring returned to Daniel's desk without a single word of genuine remorse. Word moved quietly through their social circle over the following weeks. Not through Daniel, who refused to discuss the details publicly, but through the kind of quiet truth that eventually finds its way out regardless of who tries to bury it. Vanessa's small remaining reputation in their world took the hit her actions had earned. Invitations quietly stopped arriving, and the life she tried so hard to secure for herself slipped further away instead. For Amara, the resolution came with something she hadn't expected. Not just an apology, but real change. Daniel insisted on covering the remainder of her nursing program, not as charity, he told her firmly, but as recognition of 4 years of loyalty that deserved more than it had ever received. He adjusted her hours to make her coursework easier to manage. He made sure, quietly and without fanfare, that her position at the estate would remain secure for as long as she wanted it, regardless of what happened in his own life going forward. A month later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Daniel found Amara in the rose garden again. Zoe beside her this time, small hands carefully patting soil around a new rose bush they'd planted together. "What's this one for?" he asked, kneeling down beside them. "Zoe wanted to plant something," Amara said, smiling in a way he hadn't seen from her in weeks. "She said the garden needed a happy rose." Zoe looked up at him with her serious brown eyes, dirt smudged across one cheek. "The bad lady is gone now," she said simply. "So the flowers can be happy again." Daniel laughed, a real laugh, the first one that had come easily to him in a long time. He looked at Amara, at the roses his mother had loved, at the quiet strength this young woman had carried through weeks that would have broken most people, and felt something settle in his chest that felt, for the first time in a long while, like peace. "Your mother's right," he told Zoe. "The flowers can be happy again." Amara didn't need revenge. She didn't need Vanessa to suffer in some dramatic, cinematic way. She simply needed the truth to finally stand where it belonged, and to be seen fully, for who she had always been. Patient, honest, and strong enough to survive a storm she never should have had to weather alone. If you were in Amara's position, quietly gathering evidence while your job and your dignity hung in the balance, would you have stayed silent and waited, or found a way to speak up sooner? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear what you would have done. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. There's another story waiting for you right now if you're not ready to leave just yet.